Crimson earth covered the winding path as Elias Creed tugged the leather straps, bringing his mount to a halt. Every last dollar he owned had gone toward purchasing this property, supposedly nothing more than a deserted homestead on paper, offering the promise of peaceful solitude, away from civilization's madness. Yet the scene that greeted him knocked the wind clean out of him. There in the courtyard, suspended from a weathered timber frame, hung an enormous woman by her throat. Her massive form swayed gently in the twilight air, long limbs thrashing weakly in desperate exhaustion. The coarse rope bit cruelly into her flesh, creating deep purple marks across her skin. Harsh, labored breathing barely audible above the whistle of wind through broken planks was all that remained to. Proof death hadn't yet claimed her. Elias's grip tightened on the leather reins, his weathered palms shaking. Combat had shown him mortality countless times before, far too intimately. However, this scene struck differently, not the savage fury of warfare, but humanity's cold brutality against someone helpless to resist. The dying light painted everything amber, the brittle vegetation, the deserted homestead, and the woman's battered, weakening features. Within her desperate, agonized gaze, Elias glimpsed something unexpected: terror, hopelessness, and a wordless cry for help. Dismounting his saddle, his fingers instinctively found the blade's grip on his belt. With prairie winds screaming around him, Elias realized mere moments remained for his decision. Would he ride past like countless others had? Or slice through that rope and plunge headfirst into consequences he sensed would demand everything? Consider this. Standing in Elias's position, what choice would you make? Would you rescue the woman or allow destiny to run its course? Share your perspective in the comments. I'm genuinely curious to know. The steel severed the hemp cleanly. Her massive frame crashed earthward, sending up thick clouds of rust-colored dust. Elias fell to his knees, calloused fingers sliding under her skull for support. Fever burned through her skin while each breath emerged as fractured gasps. Pressing against her throat, he detected a weak, irregular heartbeat. "You're breathing. Hold on now." "Don't surrender," Elias whispered, uncertain whether he addressed her or himself. Following several sips from his water flask, she released a soft groan. Heavy lids flickered slowly apart, revealing unusual eyes, pale storm-colored blue-gray, brimming with tears and terror. Her mouth moved, producing a broken murmur. "Cain betrayed me, abandoned me." Then consciousness left her once more. That name struck Elias like a dagger thrust. Samuel Cain, the very individual who'd sold him this property weeks earlier. The cost had seemed suspiciously low, the transaction hurried and filled with anxious pressure. Elias recalled Cain's insistence. "You want it or not? Sign immediately. This deal won't repeat itself." Now the truth was clear. Cain hadn't merely sold him acreage, he'd transferred a buried nightmare left dangling in plain view. Elias settled back in the parched soil, surveying the ranch, the sagging timber dwelling, the collapsed fencing, the nearly empty well. Everything appeared abandoned, yet telltale signs remained. A recently painted entrance, partially tilled earth rose, fresh straw scattered in animal enclosures. Someone had resided here lately, at least until the noose tightened around the giant woman's neck. Elias's jaw clenched. Years of conflict had taught him this truth. Every acre of Western territory was stained with blood, and latecomers often inherited the price abandoned by their predecessors. He'd sought this place for tranquility, somewhere to leave battle behind. Instead, this ground welcomed him with hemp and a dying spirit. Observing the woman again, her imposing stature might initially frighten a man, but her features appeared youthful, almost innocent-like, someone who'd never experienced normal existence. The neck bruises, the arm scratches told stories of torment, of treatment worse than animal abuse. Branded a beast and displayed as a warning to others. Wind gusted past, making the front door's hinges groan as if the earth itself mourned. Elias drew breath, bent down, and hoisted her over his shoulder. He'd carried wounded soldiers from bloody fields before. Now he bore a life that society had condemned and discarded. Crossing rotting porch planks, he pushed the cabin door wide. Ancient smoke and aged timber scents hit him squarely. He placed her on a torn mattress in the corner, then closed the door behind them. Outside, the western sun dimmed, bathing the hanging structure in blood-red light. Elias understood with crystal clarity. The moment he cut that rope, he ceased being merely a passerby. He'd stepped directly into Samuel Cain's abandoned tale of story, destined to contain more bloodshed and anguish. Yet perhaps, just perhaps, a story offering him something he'd believed permanently lost. Purpose for continuing to exist, flickering lamplight threw pale yellow radiance across cracked timber walls. Elias sat silently beside the bed, watching. The trembling form breathed in shallow, irregular patterns. He'd bound cloth torn from his own shirt around her, throat bruises, and positioned water and stale bread within reach. Eventually, heavy eyelids fluttered. Breathing quickened and shallowed. Those strange gray-blue eyes opened not with fury or violence, but the expression of someone who'd clawed back from death's threshold. Elias nodded slightly, voice low and calm. "You're breathing, that's what counts." She swallowed painfully, throat parched and raw. "Why? Why rescue me?" Elias shrugged, maintaining steady eye contact. "I've witnessed too many abandoned souls, and I promise never to allow it again." She remained silent, eyes reflecting something uncertain, partly suspicion, partly gratitude. Then her lips quivered, and words poured forth. "Him, Samuel Cain, he's the one who strung me up." That name made Elias clench his teeth. He remembered Cain shoving documents across the table, fast-talking, rushing the agreement. "What reason?" Elias asked roughly. The woman bit her lip, massive shoulders trembling. "I labored for him, tilled his ground, constructed his barriers, repelled attackers. I did everything, but debt consumed him. When collectors arrived, he offered me as payment, called me a beast, left me tied up to hang as a warning to anyone who might oppose him." Her voice fractured, but each word struck Elias like a blade. He'd spent his last coins purchasing this land, believing he was buying peace, only to walk into a pit of betrayal. He studied her face, still dust-stained and blood-dried, eyes heavy with the pain of being used, then discarded. "Not a monster? Simply a person thrown away like refuse. What's your name?" Elias asked quietly. "Mara," she whispered. "My mother chose that name." "But most people just called me the monster." In that small room's silence, Elias clenched his fists. He understood now. If Mara survived because of him, then from this point forward he was no longer solitary. But it also meant his own fate was now bound to the deep hole Samuel Cain had abandoned. Outside, wind howled through trees. Somewhere distant, a dog cried in darkness. Elias turned toward the window, spotting lights in the distance. Faint. Lantern flickers swaying in blackness, moving slowly down the village path. He knew immediately it wouldn't be long before those who'd hanged Mara returned. And this time, they wouldn't come for her alone. Hoofbeats echoed from afar, steady and purposeful like war drums. Elias extinguished the oil lamp, letting darkness consume the room entirely. He tilted his head, listening. Each step, each leather creak spoke of confidence, the slow approach of men certain their quarry had nowhere to flee. Mara lay motionless on the bed, eyes wide with terror, chest heaving in panicked bursts. Elias placed a rough hand on her shoulder, whispering, "Don't fear, I've faced this before. We still have options." The front door shuddered under heavy pounding. A man's voice, gravelly and thick with cheap tobacco, shouted, "Elias Creed, we know you're inside, and that freak too. Emerge now before we torch this dump." Elias closed his eyes momentarily. They knew his name, meaning Cain had sold more than property, and news had traveled faster than anticipated. He unlatched the door and stepped onto the porch. Moonlight bathed the yard in cold silver. 5 men sat atop horses in formation, pistols on hips, hard expressions. The leader, a man with thick beard and predatory eyes, stepped forward. "What do you want?" Elias asked, voice calm and icy. "What do we want?" The bearded man snorted. "Cain's debt. He promised payment with this land and that beast he kept in the barn. Now he's gone and you're holding the burden." Elias didn't respond immediately, scanning the scene, the broken gate, the patchy dying grass, the gallows where Mara nearly perished. This land truly was the wake Cain had abandoned. "I purchased this property with my own funds." I possess a deed signed by the territorial court. Whatever corrupt deal Cain made has nothing to do with me, the men laughed. The bearded one spat. On the ground, out here, court documents mean nothing. The only law that matters is whose weapon speaks loudest. You have 7 days, Creed. Either pay up or leave. Abandon the freak for us to handle. He yanked the reins. The group turned and rode off, kicking up red dust that danced in moonlight. Elias stood motionless, hand unconsciously tightening around his gun grip. He'd wanted to leave warfare behind, but once again, blood and bullets had found him. Stepping back inside, Mara was sitting upright, her enormous shadow stretching across the wall. Eyes shimmered with tears, voice trembling. You see, I only bring trouble. They'll kill you just like they tried to kill me. Elias studied her for a long moment. In dim light, she wasn't a monster, just a broken spirit waiting for someone to believe in her. He released a tired breath, voice rough. Maybe I should walk away, but if I abandon you, I'll never sleep peacefully again. Outside, wind howled through gallows wood, creaking like death still circling overhead. Elias knew the next 7 days would be more than a fight for land. It would be a battle to protect the life. He just pulled back from the brink. I'm truly grateful for your presence here. If this story stirred memories of red dust evenings and hoofbeats echoing in your chest, then subscribe to my channel so we can gather daily for another tale from the Old West. 7 days swept past like a tornado, scattering crimson earth across the plains. Elias and Mara threw themselves into labor reconstructing barriers, excavating water channels, sowing rows of withered grain. During daylight, they toiled under a sun that blazed like an inferno. During darkness, Elias studied debt records. By lamplight, while Mara quietly repaired clothing, her large, awkward hands working with determined persistence. Still, both knew time was merely a noose tightening with each passing hour. And as promised, at dusk on the 7th day, hoofbeats returned low and steady from the horizon. Red dust rose high, obscuring the dying sun. A gang of more than a dozen men thundered in on horseback, rifles gleaming, rope coils slung over shoulders. At the front rode the same bearded man from before, his cruel smile widening at the sight of Elias standing firm at the broken gate. Creed, he bellowed. Time's expired. The land and that beast belong to us now. Elias didn't reply. He simply raised his Winchester, the black barrel catching dusk's last light. Mara stepped forward behind him, towering like a mountain, neck. Bruises still visible, but her eyes burned with fire. They laughed. You plan to face all of us? An aging man past his prime and a half-dead freak? No one answered. The first shot cracked like thunder. Elias squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck dirt inches from a horse's hoof, sending dust flying. The horse reared and screamed. The gang scattered. Chaos erupted. Gunfire tore through the air. Sparks and smoke lit the ranch like a storm. Elias crouched behind wooden fencing, firing with lethal precision. Years of war had made him cold, steady, unshakable. Mara let out a roar deep and guttural. She charged forward, seizing a man mid-swing. With brute force, she lifted him like a grain sack and slammed him groundward. He didn't rise. 2 more attempted to lasso her, ropes flying. She snarled, yanked back, and flung them both into dirt. Then she grabbed a post from the gallows, tore it loose, and swung it wide, clearing 3 men in a single strike. Screams, gunfire, and panicked horses filled the air, transforming the ranch into a hell of dust and rage. Elias reloaded, hands trembling with fury but eyes cold as stone. Every shot dropped another man who dared approach. Finally, only the bearded leader remained. He crouched behind a saddle, eyes darting. Elias stepped forward, rifle aimed, but Mara was faster. She seized him by the collar and lifted him off the ground, eyes blazing. He shrieked, legs flailing in terror. Don't! Elias shouted, stepping in, gun still raised. If we kill him, we're no better than they are. Mara panted, knuckles white. Around the man's shirt, her eyes filled with tears, not from rage, but from years of humiliation finally boiling over. The yard fell silent. After a long pause, she let him drop. He collapsed like a sack of rotted hay. Elias turned to him, rifle still steady. Run, tell the others. If you return, this land becomes your grave." The bearded man scrambled onto his horse and fled, others not far behind. Silence returned to the ranch, broken only by wind, gunpowder scent, and two figures left standing, a battle-worn soldier and a towering woman who refused to be broken. They had won. But Elias knew this was only the beginning of a long fight. To hold this land, to protect the life he'd saved, and to nurture the fragile trust now blooming between two outcasts who had found each other. That night, the ranch reeked of gunpowder and blood. A small fire crackled inside the old fireplace, casting flickering shadows across Elias's worn face and Maraz's towering figure curled in the room's corner. Outside, wind still howled through broken fencing, but for the first time in weeks, human. Warmth filled the house. Elias picked up the debt ledger the men had left behind, flipping through pages beneath the dim oil lamp. Numbers ran long, stacking into a mountain of debt enough to destroy an entire family. His brow furrowed, lips tightened. "He borrowed it all in your name, and on this land." Mara said nothing, her wide hands clenching her shirt's edge as if trying to tear the memory from her skin. Her voice came rough. "All I knew was plowing, building, standing guard at night. He said I was his. I thought that meant loyalty. Turns out it was just a chain." Elias looked at her for a long time, and for the first time something flickered in his tired eyes, compassion. "Cain ran, but I won't. If I bought this land, then I bought the weight that came with it, but I won't carry it alone." He slapped the ledger shut and laid it firmly on the wooden table. "Listen to me, Mara. We'll repay this through work, not with lives. I'll handle numbers and trades. You protect the land, watch over the livestock. From now on, this is a partnership. Not a burden?" Mara looked up, eyes glassy with tears. "You trust me? After everything, I'm just a burden." Elias let out a dry, rough laugh like wood snapping in fire. "I saw you knock down 3 grown men with a rotting beam. That's not a burden, that's strength." In that moment, there were no monsters, no outcasts, just two people sitting by the fire, sharing fragile hope. The next day, Elias mounted his horse, taking with him the ledger and a few sacks of leftover corn. He rode to the border market where traders, most of them cheated by Cain, gathered. He sat across from them, firm and honest. "Cain fled, but I stayed. Give me time. This land will bear fruit again. I'll repay every cent." His blunt honesty surprised them. An old trader stroked his silver beard and gave a slow nod. "Creed, I don't trust many men, but I trust the eyes of someone who's seen war. You have 3 months. Fail, and the land is mine." Elias returned at sunset, worn thin, but clear in purpose. He told Mara everything. She stood still for a moment, then bowed her head. 3 months. Then we'll make this land bloom again, I promise." Together they looked out across dry, cracked fields, and in the deep red glow of the setting sun, they saw something smaller. New chance. Fragile, faint, but enough to hold on to. Enough to begin a journey to reclaim what was lost with sweat and blood. 3 months passed. The harsh west still howled with wind and red dust, but Elias and Maraz's land had transformed. Rows of young corn stretched green across fields. Fence lines stood straight and strong. Cattle bellowed with life from rebuilt pens. Fresh water trickled through irrigation ditches like blood returning to an old heart. Each morning, Elias rose before sunrise, planting crops, riding to town with goods for trade, setting aside every hard-earned coin to chip away at Cain's abandoned debt. Every night, no matter how bone-tired, he sat by the fire adjusting ledgers, weathered face lit by flame, eyes wrinkled deep but full of purpose. Mara worked tirelessly. With her unnatural strength, she carried timber 3 grown men couldn't lift, drove off wolves in darkness, stood tall against prairie storms, and never once complained. Yet her great hands were gentle too. She patched Elias's shirts, picked wildflowers for the chipped clay vase, and from time to time, she laughed a pure, childlike laugh as if no one had ever called her a monster. One evening, as Elias returned from market with a small pouch of coin, he found Mara standing in the cornfield, face flushed in sunset's glow. She turned, holding up a bundle of freshly picked corn, eyes shining with the pride of a child showing off a hard-won prize. Elias laughed out loud, sound he thought he'd buried with the war. That night, they sat on the porch. Elias slowly poured 2 cups of black coffee, voice low and steady. 3 months ago, I thought I'd bought a trap. Turns out I found a home. Mara froze for a second. Then her wide, tear-filled eyes softened. She placed her broad hand gently over his and whispered, "You believed in me when the whole world left me hanging. I'll never forget that." They sat in silence. No more words were needed, only wind across the field, quiet cricket chirps, and peace they hadn't known in years. The debt wasn't gone. Danger could return. But Elias understood. He'd found something war had never given him, a reason to live. And Mara, once mocked and hung like a monster, was now called by her name, seen. Not with fear, but with respect. In the West, justice was often tied to rope's end. But sometimes it was a pair of scarred hands that reached up, cut the rope, and gave someone a second chance at life. A blazing dawn stretched across the prairie. Golden light spilled over the old wooden cabin's roof where thin smoke wisps rose from the chimney. A declaration that this place had returned to life. Elias Creed sat on the porch, steaming coffee cup in hand. His cold gray eyes now carried more lines than ever, but behind them glowed warmth that had never been there before. Out in the yard, Mara laughed as a group of calves ran clumsily around her feet. That laugh, loud and pure, drowned out every shadow ever cast by the name Monster. Today she was no longer the woman who once hung from gallows. She was alive, strong, and home. Elias remembered that first evening when he arrived, gallows swaying in wind, a giant figure hanging, barely clinging to life. And he had stood at crossroads, walk away or cut the rope. Back then he never imagined that one choice would change everything, that it would not only save a life, but free his own from loneliness and war's ghosts. In 3 short months, they'd plowed land together, fought off debt collectors, rebuilt the ranch from ground up. What Cain had left behind like a trap, they'd turned into a home. The debt ledger, once thick and suffocating, now only half remained. And Elias believed someday they'd erase it completely, but even now, with that weight still on their backs, he'd seen enough to know they could endure anything so long as they stood together. Mara looked up and caught Elias's gaze. In her eyes there was no more doubt, only respect and something gentler, like glowing coals beneath ashes. She walked to him and placed her wide, warm hand on his shoulder. "We survived, Elias," she said softly, "and we'll keep going." He nodded. Yes, we turned a noose into a bond. Beyond them, the prairie stretched wide and endless. Wind carried the scent of young corn and firewood, replacing the smell of blood and gunpowder from days gone by. Elias knew the West would always be harsh, that someday others might come calling for blood. But now he wasn't alone. And Mara, once called a monster, had become his faith, his strength, and his reason to keep living. Out in the Wild West, law often lived on paper and justice swung from rope. But sometimes true justice came from one soul, brave enough to cut that rope. If the story of Elias and Mara touched your heart, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel to hear more heartfelt Western stories where lost souls find one another in dust and wind. And if you can share this video, because sometimes all it takes is one moment of courage to save an entire life.